Hey everybody, Riley here from Middle School Readiness. Today's video is an ATC EMS interview. We have a paramedic and a captain, so without further ado, we'll get right into the video. Hello everybody, Riley here from Middle School Readiness. In today's episode, we have two people from our good friends at Austin Travis County EMS. We have a captain and paramedic, so we're going to go ahead and let them introduce themselves, and then we'll get right into the video.
Hi, my name is Cassi Lydon, and I'm a paramedic, or what's known as a clinical specialist with Austin Travis County EMS, and I have been with the department for almost 19 years, which makes me feel very old to say, and still really enjoying going to work every day.
My name's Kenny Pailes. I'm also really old. I shouldn't say also, because Cassie's not really old. I'm really old. I'm a captain in the same department, even though I haven't been in this department as long as Cassie has. I've been here, this is my 11th year in Austin Travis County EMS, but my 28th year in public safety. So there's the really old part. By the way, I'm also a paramedic. We're both paramedics. Mm-hmm. And I know we're going to talk about the hierarchy later, but it gets so confusing in our department because we have titles and we have ranks and we have certification and all of that. But yeah.
Okay. So how did y'all get into the medical field? What spurred you on to take this career field?
I'll go ahead and go first. So I grew up in a very small community in eastern Nevada. When I say small, the closest grocery store was an hour and a half away. And so there was a volunteer ambulance squad in the area, and my dad was on that. And one of my earliest memories, I think I was maybe 3 or 4, I used to love to ask him to read to me out of his big orange book, which I didn't know at the time that was actually his EMT textbook. So he obviously would try to not have the really gross pictures, but I used to just go and pull it off the shelf and look through it. And I got to go to all of their training sessions each month, and I was a pretend patient of theirs through all of these. And so it was something that I kind of was always interested in. And after I went to college, I thought I wanted to go to medical school, but I wanted to make sure that I really liked medicine as much as I thought I did. And so I kind of wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps a little bit. I had already had my EMT, but had never gotten to work as one. So I went ahead and I got my paramedic up in Oregon, and then came here to Texas to do my internship, which is the time that you do on the ambulance, and then ended up coming back here and got hired here. I didn't end up going to medical school. I did apply, and I kind of had been here long enough that I ultimately decided I didn't want to go to medical school anymore because I have a job that I love, and I don't have to do all the paperwork that doctors have to do, nor would I take on all the debt that a physician would have to take on. And so I'm here. I'm about 4 years from being able to retire, and it's pretty amazing. So.
And we're lucky to have you, Cassie, seriously. I know Cassie was working just yesterday, and I was just remarking, because she works in the southern part of our city, that South Austin doesn't know how lucky they are when she's on duty, because she's Not just experience, but you can tell she's just a wonderful person.
Yeah, thank you, Katie.
That's true. Let's see, I actually started as a firefighter, and in Texas, all paid firefighters have to be essentially at least an EMT. So my entry into the world of EMS wasn't through EMS. And when I got into my EMT class, I had a really good field training officer. Shout out Scott Goodnow. And he was amazing. And I think on my very first ambulance ride, of course, there were the exciting things that I loved when I was like a super young firefighter. We had a gunshot wound and, some other fun stuff. But I really, I think that initial impression of what EMS is in terms of caregiving really spoke to what I wanted to do as a firefighter, which is, help and serve people. And so a few years into my career, the department I was with realized that we didn't really have ambulances close to us. We had one ambulance that was in our area, but other than that, we had to rely on a helicopter most of the time as our first in ambulance, which meant if we had a critical patient, we were waiting quite a long time and needing to be distracted by, landing a helicopter. But if that person needed any like advanced interventions, we couldn't do anything about it. And I hated that feeling of hopelessness. So our department started putting people through paramedic school, and I was the first one to do that. And in that process, I fell even more in love with it. So, yeah, that's how I got into the medical field. Really by, I think initially by accident, then by necessity, but eventually just found that it's really an enjoyable thing.
Yeah. Interesting. Um, so this one's more for the captain, but Austin Travis County EMS, in the name it's Austin Travis County. So is it through the city or is it through the county? Is it a joint effort? How does that work?
Yes, yes, and yes. Yeah, all those things. We are all City of Austin employees. All of our trucks are owned by the City of Austin. We are literally hired by the city. We're a city department, but the city exists almost completely within Travis County, and there are big parts of Travis County, and that's actually where I was working. That I told you before, we didn't really have an ambulance nearby, and parts of the county before Austin grew and turned into this big, huge metropolis that we are now, there wasn't really enough high property value to pay for an ambulance system as sophisticated as the one in the city of Austin. So instead, the county made a deal and said, we will pay the city of Austin to provide EMS services outside of the city limits. And that deal still exists today. And part of that deal was we're going to give you a lot of money. So you should probably put our name on your patch and on your trucks and everything else. And so we do. And it makes for a confusing name, but we don't mind it because at the end of the day, it just represents all of the people that we represent. And we're pretty proud of that. We're the only public safety department in the whole area that can say that we represent such a large jurisdiction, as just like a point of fact.
Yeah.
So, yeah, does that make sense though?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's called an interlocal agreement or an ILA.
Okay.
And we're also what's known as a third service, which is kind of a in between, basically. So there's the privates, which are what you see in a lot of cities, or sometimes fire based, and we're kind of this very unique thing where, we're kind of a city service, but the money that might be generated from bills and things like that goes back into the general fund for the city, and then we have kind of a set budget that we operate off of. So it's really great because it means that our primary focus is taking care of patients, and it also means that they take very good care of us as employees in terms of making sure that we've got really good equipment so that we can stay safe and not have on-the-job injuries and things like that. So it's a really great place to work from that standpoint also.
Okay. I was wondering because my dad lives in Marble Falls, and that's where I got the idea to interview people from Austin. And we have a city fire department, and then we have a privately owned ambulance company, Marble Falls Area EMS. So I was like, how does this one work? Because it's different from both, but some things are the same.
Well, Riley, I think it's a very, first of all, hats off, because not all eighth graders are willing to say, I don't know this.
Yeah.
Not all adults are willing to say, I don't know this. Let me find out about it. And EMS in the United States, it looks so many different ways everywhere you go. Each state is different. In Texas, every county is different. Every city is different. There's so many different, we call them models for delivery of the service, that, there are a lot of variables, like where's your funding coming from? And who is your primary employer? What is your primary mission? Do you have multiple missions? Are you uniform, public safety? Are you civilian? Are you volunteer? Are you paid? And in our case, we check a few boxes that it turns out are pretty rare in the U.S., right, Cassie? I think we're still the largest
We are.
third service municipal EMS system. We're the only one that is both civil service and union uniform. So I know we're going to, again, talk about hierarchy later, but in the city of Austin, there's a police chief, there's a fire chief, there's an EMS chief. They each have their own departments. And that's something that's not as common as combining EMS with fire, or having EMS provided by a nonprofit or a private for-profit system. So yeah, you're not alone in not knowing or wondering what's going on, but that's why it's just so variable everywhere.
Yeah. And so,
I was just going to share, just to kind of give you an idea, we have 697 sworn positions, to give you an idea of our size.
that's a lot.
Yeah.
Pretty big. Especially for just EMS.
Yeah. Usually when people think of like an ambulance, they see the ones that say so-and-so fire department on the side. They don't think of it being a separate entity. So one of you is a paramedic, or clinical specialist, one of you is a captain. So what vehicles do both of y'all operate out of on a daily basis?
I primarily operate out of one of our ambulances. So all of our frontline units are mostly Dodge chassis right now. We have a few that are some Fords and I believe a couple Chevys. And so that might be changing just a little bit because supply chain issues and all of these things. But most of our fleet is primarily Dodge. And so that's what we drive. It's a 550, I think. So it's a pretty good size unit. I'm about 5'6" and I can stand up completely in the back and not have to worry about hitting my head. So it's a pretty good size box that's on the back. I can't really get into like the specific stat sizes, but yes, so that's what I drive. That was pretty much what I was driving, yesterday, for about 24 hours. We were up for a lot of that time. But that's primarily what I operate out of. We do have some other ones that we'll use for some special events, but that's mostly what I drive.
And I drive, it's a Ford Explorer model called a Ford Interceptor. So it's really made for law enforcement. So it's an SUV, and we do that because it sort of saves the city money to assign vehicles to the part of the department that I work for that they've ordered in the giant police package, right? But it doesn't get striped as a police vehicle, and there's some other sort of modifications. And my radio call sign, I noticed it said vehicle number is CHIP 6, and that just stands for Community Health Paramedic 6, because I work in a division of our department that doesn't operate off of ambulances.
Interesting.
I'll find a picture of that for you.
And I missed that part. I have two different trucks that I work on. I'm on what's known as a rotating one. And so I have one truck where my last shift, we ended up getting, I think we had 4 calls in 24 hours. And then the shift that I was on yesterday was my busy truck, which is Medic 2. My slow one is Medic 31. And yesterday was a little bit of a slower day for us. We only had probably about 12 calls. My last shift on that truck, we had closer to 16. So it's pretty busy.
And so in the captain's vehicle, I know most of your ambulances are probably ALS capable, but the captain vehicle, is it ALS or BLS?
Yeah, good question. It is also ALS, Advanced Life Support, but with some modifications, obviously, because my vehicle's not licensed to transport a patient, which is important. The state of Texas only allows you to transport patients in vehicles designated for that. So my vehicle is more for advanced life support, either first response or adjunctive response. So if an ambulance is already there, I'm going to join them in their care and have less of the things, but I have the same important things. I carry the same Zol X cardiac EKG monitor that's on Cassie's ambulance.
Mm-hmm.
I can run a cardiac arrest for quite a while without an ambulance crew. I have intubation equipment. I have oxygen, of course. I've got medications, and I do carry narcotics. In fact, my team is designed in a way that we carry some medications that we don't carry on the ambulances. So the ambulances have some equipment that I don't have. I don't carry an ultrasound, and they do. And then I carry some medicine, and they don't. Some of that medicine, yeah.
I see.
Yeah.
And so, what station do either of you or both of you mainly work out of?
So I work out of 2, and I do a 1-to-1. So yesterday I was at my busy truck Medic 2. So I'll be off for 3 days. And so Sunday I'll go back to work, and I'll be at my hopefully slower station, which is Medic 31.
What part of town is 31 in?
It is in South. Both of those are South Austin. Medic 2 is near William Cannon and Manchac, and it is right next door to a fire station, which is Station 20. And then Medic 31 is down in Circle C in kind of far southwest Austin, and it shares a building with Engine 43. But we kind of each have our own side, but we've got like a shared kitchen, day room area.
So I actually have an office for when I'm doing administrative work, and it's off of the 183 toll road right by MLK. So really far east, southeast Austin on the way to the airport. But when I'm in 911 response mode, which is now actually going to be a lot more of the time, probably Cassie doesn't even know. This is the big reveal.
You'll have to tell me later.
Just gathered you here to reveal this today. And that's out of Medic 19 station, which is also Fire Station 38 up in northwest Austin, far northwest Austin, a neighborhood called Anderson Mill.
Okay.
But,
and
yeah, go ahead. You go ahead.
And could you, in different departments, I've noticed that they have different hierarchy and ranks. How is yours set up?
I take a whack at it?
Ours is complex, is what I will start with. So we have kind of an entry-level position, which is what's called a medic position. And this is where it gets a little bit unique. You can come in as a paramedic or an AEMT or AEMT to that position. And then you can promote and become a clinical specialist, which is what I am. And that promotion is a civil service test. And so it's a, very structured, what material to study and things like that. It's very similar to police and fire. They're both also civil service. And we are one of the only civil service departments also in the country, which is pretty interesting for EMS. And so we got that back in 2013. So once you become a clinical specialist, you can then promote again to become a captain. And this is similar whether you're in the field or in communications. It's the same kind of basic one. In communications, you don't have to be a paramedic to become a clinical specialist, but you do in the field. And so then you can promote again and become a district commander. And then you can promote again, and this is where I'm going to get a little fuzzy, so Kenny might need to help me. District commander goes to division chief, and then goes to assistant chief. And then the chief is not a promoted position. That is one that usually comes from outside the department. And some of our division chiefs or assistant chiefs are promoted and some are appointed. So it's kind of a little bit of a mix. Did I hit everybody, Kenny?
I think you got it.
Okay.
Yeah, that was really good. I found finally a picture of my vehicle if you want to see that too. Let me show you real fast so you get a good idea of kind of the scale and look of it, and you'll recognize that it's looks like a kind of a police vehicle. In Austin, that's what our police almost exclusively respond in. They don't use sedans, they use those SUVs.
Okay. And so what are the requirements for joining ATC EMS? Do you have to have your EMT? Do you have to have your paramedic? Or can you just join with nothing, with no prior training?
It's a good question. We are a bit different from the other public safety departments in the city in that way too. You can go straight into the Austin Police Department with no experience or training, and the same with the Austin Fire Department. But Austin Travis County EMS, we do need folks that have training and experience. So like Cassi mentioned, you can enter our department as an EMT, but you have to have at least a year of 911 experience. But you can enter our department as a paramedic, which is about 10 times the training and education of an EMT, initial training. And we even have our lateral hire program, which is where a paramedic with experience can come in at that second rank, that clinical specialist rank. That's where we are. We then have an academy that we do. I don't know if that's one of the questions, but so there's a requirement for pre-hire training and experience, and then after we hire you, we also train you and have a bunch of experiential learning. And we do all that because I think you can kind of see and figure out for yourself that loading up people with all of that training and experience really makes for great caregivers.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And as you mentioned, it is one of the questions. So you said that ATCMS has a academy. What particularly do they train in or go over in the academy?
Go ahead, Cass.
I'll say it is a 10-week academy currently to come in, and that's just whether you're coming in as that lateral hire position or as that medic position. You come in and you go through a 10-week academy first. And it's everything from there's like 2 days where you're really kind of learning some like city policy things and signing up for your insurance and choosing different type of benefits and all those kind of things. And then you also go through and you will do some knowledge like testing. You'll do lots of hands-on scenarios. You'll do some driving around the city and practicing something called EVOC, which is Emergency Vehicle Operations courses, to practice driving the ambulances. Because a lot of times people come in and they've never driven anything bigger than, their small car. And what we drive is a lot bigger. It's smaller than what it was when I came in, but it still is very big. Let's see, they also do some kind of self-defense de-escalation classes. They have physical training every morning with exercise physiologists. They have swift water rescue classes. They actually get to go with the fire department a little bit and kind of do some skills that aren't so much done by us necessarily, like extrication of people from cars, so they can get some familiarity with that. Some of our rescue folks come in and they actually get to do some ropes stuff off of like the fire tower. Am I missing anything else big, Kenny?
No, I think you could probably figure it out from what she was saying, but that initial training is done on the same campus as the Fire Academy and Police Academy, which is good. It kind of speaks to the fact that we are all considered, public safety, important, critical public safety, which probably, again, is a bit different than some other EMS systems. But it's also really distracting when the police are on their firing range and you're trying to teach a class. A bunch of loud banging happening out there. But it's good for us, and it's good for especially the folks that we have just hired, because they may have come from a place that isn't like that at all. And so they get an opportunity to be around the police cadets who are kind of moving and acting in a certain way, and the same with the fire cadets. They start to understand kind of potentially like the culture that they're going to fit into. And I think people appreciate that. They like kind of being integrated in that way into the same academy. So a lot of the stuff Cassi was talking about is done in a place that you would think of as, in my mind, like a fire academy drill tower, and a fire academy drill field is where we're training our cadets also.
And then once you finish the academy, you're assigned a training officer and you go out onto a 3-person crew. And you're there for anywhere from probably 3 or 4 weeks up to maybe 2 months. And then you are on a 2-person crew with just you and your training officer. It could be the same one or somebody different, but that's your time to kind of be out on the ambulance. But usually from the time you're hired to the time you clear is anywhere from 6 to 9 months. And then you can kind of be out doing your independent stuff. The people who come in through the lateral hire go through that same 10-week academy, and then they have, I think it's maybe about 4 to 6 weeks where they're out with their training officer, kind of getting used to what we call the operational side of things. So how to use all the computers and the equipment and how to navigate to the hospitals and make sure that they can kind of do those basic things. And then they go right into our 16-week training academy. That's the ALS Academy. And that's something that even if you've been with the department for years, or if you come in and you've got years of experience, you still go through that 16-week of training, because we do have a very, very high standard of care here. Our physicians have a lot of faith in us, and they have given us very broad skills and interventions that we can do. When I talk to people around the country about some of the stuff that we do, some of my other friends who I went to paramedic school with back in Oregon, they cannot believe the things that we do here. And so that's why it is such an intensive training process with those 2 separate academies, because it really, like Kenny said, EMS is kind of an interesting thing. It's not the same all across the country. And so you have sometimes people coming in with this knowledge level and some up here, and you kind of need to get, them a little bit more balanced, so that way you make sure that we're making really good, sound clinical decisions and know the anatomy and physiology behind why we're doing them and how the medications work and why we're doing the things, because they can be dangerous if you don't understand all those things.
I want to add to that. We actually, everything Cassi said is true and amazing. And we fortunately attract people that are wanting to work in a system that has a reputation for great medical care. And sometimes that means that we hire somebody actually that is like way up there in knowledge beyond the experiences that I've had. We've had some folks come in that are legitimate experts in specific parts of EMS. And it's such a gift when somebody like that comes in. But those folks who even have this higher level of experience and expertise, they also enjoy the 16-week extra ALS training and testing, because it really gives you an opportunity to challenge yourself a little bit and grow, and build confidence too. Because there's nothing worse than going in and everybody thinks you really know your stuff, but you're not sure you do. You go through the 16 weeks and you find out that you do. And there's no denying it because you wrote paper after paper and you sat in classes taught by doctors and you passed these scenarios and you did all the things of the ultimate tests. And there's just no denying that you are ready to take care of people at the highest level. That's really why we do that training. And it's less about, I think, us and more about like the people that we hire and how much we appreciate them and respect them.
Okay. And you mentioned the EVOC course.
Yeah.
So, as a paramedic, are you only in the back? Are you only driving, or do y'all switch around on the ambulance?
So you want to start with yours, Kenny, and then I'll go?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So for me, on the team that I'm on now, everybody that's on the team I'm on now worked on an ambulance in the part of our department we call the field, and then chose to compete for a position on this team. So we've all done that job, but this job, since I told you it's not ambulance based, if I'm with a patient during transport, I'm going to be in the back because it's somebody that I started care for and had to call an ambulance. And then I'm going to continue that care all the way until I get them to the hospital. But it's much different when you're on the ambulance for 24 hours, Cassie.
And so we're what's called we're not truly a tiered system, but we have different provider levels. And so my regular partner, she's a paramedic, but in our system, she's only credentialed to practice to a certain level, which is kind of closer to an EMT level. And so if it's a patient that falls within her scope of practice, she'll be the one in the back taking care of the patient, and I will drive us in. But if it is a patient that's an ALS patient, that falls into my scope of practice, and I'll be the one in the back, and she'll be driving us in. In terms of driving to calls, we still go to most of our calls with lights and sirens, and we'll oftentimes just trade off on those. And so it kind of varies. There'll be some shifts where, I'll have 5 or 6 patients in a row because they're all just really sick. And, my partner, sometimes she jokes, she's like, I feel like I'm driving Miss Daisy. Like all I'm doing today is driving. Like she's like, I haven't been able to be in the back with anybody. So it really varies, but we usually kind of try to trade off as best we can.
I just want to point out that that's another one of those differences between us and some other systems, because there are places, and I'm sure that's why you asked the question, but there are places where maybe the EMT is not as entrusted to care for the patient without the paramedic present, and that isn't how we operate at all. The folks that we hire who are EMTs, again, like we have that high standard, but we build them up and build their confidence, build their competence, and they are empowered to do a lot more than most EMTs. So they're perfectly capable of safely and effectively and even excellently taking care of somebody during transport. But there are times when we don't have a choice because the skills that are required are only skills that the paramedics allowed to do. But our EMTs, they do decision making. It's not just doing what the paramedic tells them to do. They're good, smart folks.
Clinicians.
Yeah, clinicians. There you go.
So, what are the physical requirements for entering into ATC EMS?
The answer to that has changed over the years. There was a time where we had actually an obstacle course. Yep, me too. even for me, and it was a timed obstacle course, and it was really a time to more than anything establish that you could safely, say, climb a couple flights of stairs with all of the equipment that we carry, do CPR for a little while, and then help get the person down those stairs safely. Like those are important parts of what we do. And that part of our application process has disappeared, but now that those sorts of things are incorporated into our initial training. So a lot of the the physical stuff that Cassie was talking about that happens at the academy is basically to establish and enhance your ability to do the job that we do, which is kind of a lot of lifting and carrying. You have to really take care of your body.
Another big part of that is, they say that it takes, I want to say it's 3 months to kind of establish a habit. And so that's about how long our academy is. And so that's another hope, is that because you're there doing your physical, training every day consistently for 3 months, is that hopefully kind of has instilled that pattern and will carry that with you once you go out into the field.
It's, I know we're talking about like the fitness requirements, but it is a job that can be very taxing on people's bodies because you're doing a lot of lifting and carrying, but also just because we're so busy. We don't, we have a habit of eating what is conveniently available because we're so busy. And so healthy eating habits can slip if you're not careful. And stress causes metabolic changes. And so you can wind up with weight gain that you didn't expect or anticipate if you're not careful. And all those things can really contribute to injuries that can limit your ability to do the job you love doing. So that's why we focus on that physical fitness. A little bit different than the reasons that are necessary to focus on it in firefighting and law enforcement, right? We're not necessarily engaging in physical combat with a fire or a person, but we want people to have happy, healthy careers, and we want them to still be happy and healthy when they finish their career. So that takes some focus.
Okay. And what does a typical day look like for an EMS captain versus a paramedic?
Well, I will say first that again, you heard me reference that field division of our department. There are a lot of amazing captains in the field, and they work on an ambulance and do the job the same way that Cassi does. The additional mandatory part of their job is training. And that's the biggest way that we utilize captains on ambulances in Austin Travis County EMS is that all of our captains are training officers. We also have clinical specialists that have taken it upon themselves to get credentialed as training officers. They're FTOs, field training officers. But in my division, it's a little bit different, and there are other parts of our department where captains are utilized differently. Captain's sort of that position where you might find yourself in an administrative position where you're not doing really response at all. So, for instance, our public information office. It's another good example of an admin captain, Cassi.
Continuing education?
Thank you. Yeah, so the CE trainers. And so all of these folks, we still do make sure that we're maintaining our skills by occasionally working on an ambulance, but the majority of the time in our regular assignment isn't on an ambulance anymore. It's this different sort of function. But Cassi, do you want to say something about Cap?
So I just want to point of clarification. When you kind of ask what a typical day looks like, do you want me kind of to start with my getting ready to go to work as well? Or do you want to know mostly what it looks like at work?
Sure, you can do that.
So it starts actually for me a little bit the day before. Like Kenny was talking about, it can be really easy to just kind of grab whatever food is available. But I've kind of gotten to where my body's a little bit sensitive to certain foods. And so I can't eat a lot of that. So it's made it very easy to cut those out of my diet because it makes me feel really bad. And so I usually will do a pretty big meal prep the day before I go to work, kind of getting all my meals. I like to have 3 full meals plus snacks. So usually some yogurt, some veggies. I've got some granola bar, power bar type things. And then those meals as well as a lot of water. So I kind of get everything ready the day before. The morning that I go to work, I don't move quickly in the morning. I don't like to move fast or be rushed. And so I usually get up around 6:30. Our shift changes at 10 a.m. I need to leave my house by about 9:15 because I actually like to try to get there about 30 minutes early, because getting a late call is just a total bummer, because sometimes you might have to stay over, an extra 2 hours depending on how long it takes to run that call. So I try to be there about 9:30. We kind of do a little bit of a check-in with the crew that's coming on. Also, I try to make sure that I do some stretching and foam rolling, because I tend to sit a lot, especially on my busy truck. Sometimes I also really try to make sure I get some mindfulness before I go into work, especially for my busy truck, because it kind of helps me just be in the right mental space to be kind of as busy as I know I'm going to be. Once I get to the station, we'll talk about any issues that they had maybe with the truck the day before, or maybe if there's a patient that didn't go to the hospital that they really maybe felt should have, and that there's a good chance we might run on. They might just kind of give us a little rundown on some things like that. It's also kind of a time for us to debrief a little bit. Everybody processes difficult calls in a different way. For me, talking about them really helps. And so that's like a big thing that we kind of do at Crew Change, is maybe talk about if we had kind of a crazy call or a hard call, share it, look at some of the EKGs or different vital signs or things like that. They'll give us the keys, the narcotics, the radio, the cell phone that goes with the truck, let us know if anything broke on the truck or if stuff is missing, needs to be repaired. And then we go out to the truck, and the expectation is that we go through everything on the truck. It takes me and my partner probably close to 45 minutes to an hour to go through everything if we're going through it in the level of detail that she and I like. There's a range that I will say that people like to go through stuff in terms of the level of detail. But for me, it helps me feel confident that I know exactly where everything is if we get that critical call, because I've looked at it all that morning and put my hands on all of it. And then once we kind of, have checked out that truck, we've tried to replace anything that needed to get replaced. We've reported anything that was broken that needs to be fixed or anything like that. We're kind of free to do what we want if we're not on a call. So maybe on my slower truck, I'm a big reader. I'll try to do some of my continuing education sometimes. I might have some project that recruiting has asked me to do or something like that. I might, I just recently got some access to cool CE, so that's probably what I'll be doing most of the time. On my busy truck, we got a call yesterday. I think I hadn't even gotten into the back of the truck yet to start checking it when we got our first call. And then we were out running calls for about the first 4 or 5 hours. And then they told us that our regular truck was ready at the garage. So we had to take our truck to our big maintenance area and switch everything from the old truck to the new truck at about 2:00 in the afternoon. So it was a little hot. And it took us probably about an hour and a half or so, because there's a lot of stuff that you have to move over. And then it turned out we were missing some equipment. So we had to go to our main supply area and get some of those things replaced. And then, so we left the station, probably around 10:15, and we didn't get back to the station really till about 8:00 that night. It was a busy day yesterday.
Wow.
So, and then, it varies. Sometimes you'll sleep all night and you'll have 1 or 2 calls, and then other times you're out running the whole shift.
Yeah. And as you mentioned the maintenance yard, that's another question. Do y'all have, does ATC-EMS have their own maintenance yard? Is it through the city? Is it with the fire department? How does that work?
It's through the city. The one that our trucks go to is for both fire and EMS, and the mechanics that are there specialize in diesel engines and specifically fire trucks and ambulances. They also do a little bit with some of the larger SWAT vehicles, but APD has their kind of own garage that's for like their typical response cars that aren't like the big SWAT and EOD things. Mm-hmm. And that's also where Kenny's stuff has to
go. That's where I
go.
Because we have obviously a large diesel fleet, but we also have a large gasoline fleet. And so there are 2 different, we call them service centers. There are actually, I think, 7 service centers citywide. The city's got huge fleets in different departments. You can imagine the road department, the water department, the electric department, the Austin Energy, who takes care of the transmission poles and all of that, fire department, police department, EMS. And so there are several of these service centers throughout the city, and they are city owned and city employed mechanics.
Mm-hmm.
It's a pretty good job, I think, talking to the mechanics in those spots. But yeah, the one that I use is it's commonly known as APDG, or the Austin Police Department Garage,
And mine's
uh,
EMSG.
and EMSG, or Service Center 6, I think yours is, and Service Center 2 for the
Yeah.
city. Mine's right, basically like almost underneath the Austin Police Department headquarters. So really central downtown, which makes it handy.
Okay. And what would you say, or how many calls would you say you get in like day, week, month, and year?
Well, I know our system as a whole, we usually get between 350 and 450 calls a day. Does that sound about right, Kenny? Because I know they kind of, our call numbers go a little higher, but they end up taking some out.
They do. Yeah. I'll give you our official stats if you keep going, Cass.
So it's kind of, I would say that's the way that it works kind of across the system. And so we have 42 full-time 24-hour day ambulances and about 7 what we call demand trucks that are only on for 12 hours at a time. So that, 350, 450 calls is kind of spread out through that or through those. So there's kind of some extremes. There's trucks that might not run a call in that. Most of the time, most trucks now have at least one call in that 24 hours, to some of our busiest trucks that will run sometimes 16, 17, 18. On a really bad day, we can actually throw a flag and say, it's not safe. I need a little bit of a break. We need some rehab or rest time. But the busiest shift I've ever had here in terms of number of calls was I had 22 calls in 24 hours, and that was transports, not refusals, not cancels. That was a really bad shift. And that was a few years ago, actually.
Jeez. Was that during Uri?
No, that day. I actually didn't have that many calls, but we were out running because it took us so long to get everywhere that we were out of station from like 11 a.m. until I think 5 o'clock that morning. And that was just like driving. We only had like 5 calls, but it just took so long to get everywhere in between because we were in far South Austin and our very first call was up off of Parmer, and like Mopac. And so the roads were so terrible. I think it took us like 40 minutes to get there or something. It was ridiculous.
Jeez. Well, we're officially at 12,000 calls for August of 2024. That's not to say that we actually had 12,000 patient contacts, because that's a bit of a different statistic. But that's 12,000 times in a month that somebody called to ask for assistance from EMS, basically.
Okay. And another question, something that people don't commonly think about, does ATCMS work with any mutual aid departments besides like Austin Police Department and Austin Fire Department?
Yeah, I don't know that either of us have seen exactly what mutual aid agreements we have standing. If you're asking about mutual aid, you know about mutual aid. One thing we don't really have set up is what you might hear the fire department call auto aid. Have you heard that term before? So let's say there's a fire department nearby that only has one station and one engine. So if they have a house fire, they certainly are not going to be able to take care of that entire house fire by themselves. So they have an automatic agreement from their neighboring fire departments that they'll send resources. We don't have an auto aid agreement because we're so big and so resource rich. We actually do have and have used before mutual aid. I just don't know exactly what that mutual aid agreement looks like. I would be guessing. My impression is that our immediate neighbors, which are set up similarly, they're non-fire department based, municipal funded or nonprofit funded EMS systems. So Williamson County, directly to our north border, and Hays County, which is called San Marcos Hays County. Those are two EMS systems that are analogous to us, but just much, much smaller. So those are places where I wouldn't, it's not uncommon for us to see their ambulances helping in big disasters. Good, Cass.
And I would say it's, I don't know the exact logistics around it, but I do know that, for example, because we are so resource rich, we will, for example, Pflugerville, just north of us, has the fire department responds to some calls there and can transport. And then there's also a private ambulance that can respond to some. But if both of those are out, we do send units there to assist. Also, I know that we have sent units over into Elgin and Bastrop County very occasionally, and even a couple of times down to Fayette County when there were some things happening. So again, I don't know the specifics, but we do occasionally go to help other people. But in the entire time I've been here, I don't know that we've ever had anybody come in to help us, as far as I know.
Yeah, I won't challenge that. I can't.
Yeah.
I feel like it has happened, but I'm not.
Yeah, and there can also be some really unique situations. There was an incident where a fire department that transports patients had a fatality in their department. And I was on my regular 24-hour shift that morning, and it had happened overnight. And they called us and said, hey, pack all your stuff and your sleep gear into your ambulance. We're sending you out to this town that was not in our, they sent us out to Burnett, which I had actually never been to. And they put us in a fire station there. And the fire units would go with us to kind of help us get to wherever the location was and give us some hands-on help, and then kind of go back, so that way they could allow their EMS crews some time to kind of grieve. And I think we did that for maybe 5 days or a week. But that was a very unique situation. And that's kind of the only time that I've had something like that happen. We've also done some kind of interesting things, like when there were big fires going on in 2011 out in Bastrop, as well as out in the Spicewood area. We put on some extra ambulances, because normally out in the county, when there's an EMS call, the fire units go with you, just because it's so far away to get there and get some help. And because they had everybody on these fires, we were there basically to be the extra hands. And so we weren't really supposed to transport. They would dispatch us with the primary ambulance to go be that extra set of hands if it was, a critical patient. So those are kind of some unique things that we've done. But again, we don't really have a whole lot that I know about for specific mutual aid things.
We also have some specialty teams
Yes.
that are part of statewide or regional and even national response matrices. So we maintain a vehicle called the AMBUS, and there is a network of AMBUSs throughout the state of Texas. Ours is one of them. I think there may be a dozen. I'll look it up for you in a second. And ours is blue and yellow, just like our ambulances, which makes it kind of unique. That AMBUS will respond with a crew of paramedics, and some that are specially trained to drive that giant bus, and the rest that are specially trained to operate at disaster scenes, and it will get used and called out by the state, most commonly for hurricane responses. So we wind up going down to your area and other parts of the Gulf Coast. So if you ever see a big giant blue and yellow bus somewhere around Houston, and you didn't know that there was something coming, maybe check the radar. But we have all the folks that staff those things are paramedics that have regular assignments in our department, but have, again, like applied for a position on one of those specialty teams. We have also a disaster medical response team, DMRT, which is another a state asset that we can be used for. We also have medics with specialized rescue training that are attached to Texas Task Force 1 for urban search and rescue. We have helicopter qualified medics, which are actually like a pretty scarce resource. We have a swiftwater rescue boat team
also
that
pretty specialized and rare.
very specialized. Yeah, and they have a national reputation. They
Mm-hmm.
actually travel around the nation to train. And we recently started, there's an effort and a request from um, Texas Forest Service to have paramedics at wildfires
Mm-hmm.
to support the firefighters because of the incidence of injuries and even unfortunately fatalities. But it requires a little bit of extra training, just some like basic wildfire training. But our medics are not going out there to fight the fire. They're just going out there
Yeah.
to be qualified to be safe around the fire and then to support the fire mission. So we started sending paramedics to wildfires around the state of Texas a couple of years ago. Um, and then within our own city, of course, we have our own rescue team and our tactical team. But and we may have strayed a bit away from your question about mutual aid. It's usually much more about us doing what we can to help other departments.
Mm-hmm.
So that was actually the next question, if y'all had any specialty teams. So there's the water rescue, the tactical team, the ambush team, the disaster response team, helicopter teams. Are there any other specialty groups that ATCMS houses?
I know that when COVID first happened, we had some folks that were kind of some infectious disease that went down and were actually dealing with some of the very first cases here in the U.S. Similarly, when there was that small outbreak of Ebola that happened, right? Wasn't it Ebola, Kenny?
Yeah,
Some sort of hemorrhagic fever. Yeah. And so, we've sent people down for that. I'm trying to think. We do also in Kenny's group have some kind of unique teams. We have people who specialize in working with people with addiction and can go out and it can actually we have what's called a bridge program where if somebody is wanting to get into a treatment program, there's a special medication that we can give to kind of help them so that they don't get the slang term is dope sick, but feel all of the side effects of withdrawal from whatever they have been using, or whatever opioid. They can be treated with this medication until they can get into usually a residential treatment program. And we also have some people who specialize in mental health, which is one of the areas where Kenny is. And so I'll kind of let him dig into that because this is really his area of expertise.
Yeah, that's a team I'm pretty proud of. I do want to go back for a second and say the rescue team that we have is something we're pretty proud of. They work in the same capacity that the fire department rescue team does. So even though I mentioned the Swiftwater rescue team that will go out of our city, in the city, our team also does high angle rescue, confined space rescue, cave rescue. So they're closer to an all hazards rescue team with some exceptions. And the goal is to work really side by side with our fire department rescue colleagues in order to provide the most advanced level of care to a patient in an austere environment. So it's one thing to be able to rig up the lines safely and descend to somebody who has fallen off the edge of a cliff and then bring them up safely. But it's another thing to say, hey, the first person that gets down there, if they're carrying specialized kit and they have specialized training and they're a paramedic with all this experience in this very busy urban system with all this extra training that we talked about, don't we want to put that person at their side immediately to start that most advanced care right there on the cliffside? And that's what we'll do, deliver medications and start stabilizing the patient. And then instead of often, I used to do high angle rescue as well. And I remember us always discussing the patient and anything that we were hauling up was a package. And so it was a pretty important mindset shift to say this is a person, because it changes really how you respond and who you prioritize putting down there. That's the goal of our rescue team is not, it's fun, to do all the exciting things of the rigid hull inflatable boats and Zodiacs and, the cool gear, rappelling down the cliff. But The real point of it is just to be able to provide that advanced care to people regardless of where they have found themselves. So that's a pretty cool thing. And I think we mentioned the tactical team, which they train with the SWAT team. They go to the same SWAT school. SWAT team even has a hand in selecting who's on our tactical team. They're a pretty close knit group. And again, they're very high speed paramedics. First and foremost, they provide a high level of care, but they will sometimes go in. They say the stack. When the SWAT team does choose to make an entry, they'll be there with them. They don't carry weapons. That isn't their mission, but they do have the armor, the training, and everything else. Let's see. Oh, we have also a specialized track medic program as we have Circuit of the Americas here. And so it's our medics that provide the care there, track side. They get certified by Formula One and the track and everything else. People really love that. We have a whole special events division. And so these are our folks that spend time protecting people who attend our big festivals here. So like South by Southwest or ACL Music Festival. Those crowds don't know it, but they're getting this really specialized care that's using all sorts of assets that we have. We have all-terrain vehicles we call SRUs that remind me of the Batmobile, because if you ever see them coming around a corner, they go boop, 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 boop. And we have foot teams. We have even motorcycle-based teams.
The drones.
And we have drones that will monitor and help. So for instance, if you can imagine, have you ever seen the Austin City Limits Music Festival, like even pictures of it?
Yeah.
See those big crowds, just seas of people. Now imagine you're in that crowd and your friend suddenly gets stung by a bee and they have an anaphylactic reaction, but they didn't go to a music festival with their EpiPen. So they call 911 and they say, hey, my friend is dying. Where are you? Well, I'm at ACL Fest. Well, that doesn't really help, right? So we have to use this multifunctional and I guess multifaceted team to find somebody with things like drone technology and some other cool programs that we have, get a foot team out there, again, stabilize, render care, get the SRUs, and everything is well integrated and well planned and things that we are pretty proud of. So it's not just send an ambulance as fast as you can and try to figure it out when you get there. We pre-plan, and that's a team that does that. Same thing at the UT football games. We have, because that's 110,000 people in one small place at the same time. And I know you live in Houston, so it doesn't sound like a lot of people, but there are a whole lot of cities in Texas that are smaller than 110,000 people. So it's like we get this temporary city in the middle of our city, and they're out there in the heat and everything else. So that is not just our system that responds to that, it's a team. And we do that because it takes the strain off of the rest of the system.
Yeah, my dad actually lives in Marble Falls. I'm going to go see him this weekend. And we say we live in Marble Falls, but we actually live in Round Mountain, which is right outside. And their permanent population is only like 100 people.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Round Mountain, is that what you said?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It borders Marble Falls, yeah.
That's a pretty area. I really like that area. Yeah, that's
we
cool.
Get a lot of people for the blue bonnets in the spring.
Yeah. Gotta watch out for the snakes, though.
True.
All right, there's me being a paramedic. So, Cassie was talking about...
We started attaching snake bite kits to our four-wheelers and side-by-sides because we've killed like 4 snakes on our property and we only moved in like 2 months ago.
Oh, wow.
What if I could convince you to stop killing them? I wish I could. So we have the specialized team that Cassie was talking about. I should mention, the paramedics, the uniformed paramedics that come to our department, when you come into our department, you really have a choice of whether you're going to work on an ambulance, which we call the field, or if you're going to work in our communications center. And so those are comm medics. but they are all also EMTs, paramedics. They go through our academy, they're uniformed, they're civil service union, our same department. And so our whole comm division have very specialized skills in how they manage the assets of our department, and do things like call taking and dispatching, which is just itself very complex and very stressful and its own skill. But we're really proud of them because it's not, we're not just relying on somebody that just answering a phone. We've got folks with a real specialized system and crazy technology.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting when I was talking to the fire captain who was over the communications for the fire side. He was mentioning how the EMS has its own separate dispatching system, and then the fire has it, and then the police has their own as well.
It is interesting. I didn't really talk about my team, and I'm sorry. I just was trying to put everybody else ahead of me, but the division that I'm in is pretty new. So we've got the comm medics, we have our field medics, and then we have almost a separate division now called integrated services. And that's a group that right now it's about, I would say we're up to 7% of our department-ish. We have about just over 50 people in our division. And so the goal of that division is to kind of figure out innovative ways to do what EMS can do, which is provide healthcare outside of the healthcare system that normally people would call 911 for, and normally we would put them in an ambulance and take them to the emergency room. But we often did that even knowing that that was maybe not the best thing for that person, that the best thing might be some other way of delivering care, but we just didn't have the ability to do that. And so this new division, we do that for different reasons. And so one of them is one that Cassi mentioned, which is people who have deal with substance use. So part of my team, or part of the team that I work with, provides and focuses on care for people to prevent overdoses, to help connect them to recovery, to treat them medically. And that's really focused on trying to impact the opioid crisis and the overdose crisis that we're dealing with. And it's been pretty great and award-winning and very effective. And in another part of our team, we do mental health crisis response. And what we're trying to do there is pretty innovative as well. We carry some medicine that we use in a way that nobody else is doing, as far as we know, in the whole world, where sometimes we'll treat somebody with an antipsychotic medication and figure out whether or not it might be safe for them to come up with a plan to connect to long-term services, but stay in the community and not just move somebody in crisis to an ER, which you can imagine. Have you ever been in an ER?
Yeah.
It's kind of what did you think about it when you were there?
Very chaotic.
Yeah, exactly. That's the word I was going to use, and I wasn't sure if you would too. Should have given you the script. So imagine if you're in a mental health crisis and then I put you in chaos. That's probably not going to be good for you or anybody else around you. So instead, we focus on trying to do things like de-escalate and build rapport and do a safe assessment. We work with our local mental health authority, and there are some social workers and licensed clinical or licensed professional counselors sometimes that are available to help us on scenes. But what we provide is a paramedic level assessment, because sometimes somebody is having a mental health crisis, but that's masking a real medical emergency. We make sure that that's not the case. And then the thing that a social worker or a counselor can't provide is that extra medication that might help. And sometimes it's the antipsychotic, sometimes it's a kind of a sedative, or sometimes we connect them to prescribers. We also have PAs in our department. I think Cassi, I'm not sure if you mentioned that one. And then we work on getting folks into mental health resources. We have a whole other part of our team. There's a small part of our team that is at the airport, our airport medics. And that's not fair. They have like the best name ever, and they don't even like it. And they should give us the cool name. But Our airport is AUS for Austin, and they're the medics, so they're AUSM. They're the awesome team. Why would they not love that, Cassie?
I know. I think it's pretty cool.
I think they're just trying to be too cool. They know that they like it. So we have our awesome medics who found that a lot of the times people call 911 at the airport, and when we don't have an ambulance stationed at our airport. So an ambulance would take some time to get out to the airport, get to the airport, and then it takes some time. You've been to the airports.
Yeah.
It takes some time to go from the curb to the gate to find the person. And so a couple of things, like one, that's a bigger delay than we want in getting definitive care to somebody who really needs critical skills. But the other thing is, a large percentage of the time, the people that 911 was called for, they don't want an ambulance. They're in an airport. They want to keep going wherever they were going,
Yeah.
or they want to go home because they just got back. And so we have now a foot team in the airport. They make contact much quicker, and if it's a critical emergency, they have a better shot at saving a life. But also they have the ability to then cancel the ambulance so that we can save that resource for the rest of the city and the people that are having emergencies. So did I describe? Oh, almost missed C4. That's another new innovative thing we have, which are also experienced paramedics from the field who have moved into the same building as our comm medics. And what they do is, we call it secondary triage, but when somebody calls 911, if they say they're having a medical emergency, our comm medics do an amazing job of figuring out what kind of emergency it is. So if we go back to that anaphylaxis, allergic reaction, they'll be able to figure out very quickly, this is an allergic reaction, this is anaphylaxis. They dispatch it as a priority 1 allergic reaction. They know what ambulance to send, or a special event, they know how to let them know that we're going to need some help.
And they can do pre-arrival instructions also. So they can help if you don't know what to do, they can walk you through. So they're actually providing care over the phone.
But if our comm medics have asked their questions and they figure out that this is a low priority call, so something where we don't need to go rush, we have time to ask more questions. They kick that call over to this group of experienced paramedics who have some specialized training as well. And they will ask a lot more questions. And they have access to different medical records, health records, hospital records, and databases. And sometimes that's where we find out those low priority calls that we used to send an ambulance to every time. 1,000 calls a month so far, we're able to not send an ambulance at all. And we'll send something else. We'll find somebody like me, or somebody from my team, or a PA, or another resource altogether that we connect them to. Maybe urgent care, that sort of thing.
And when you think that we have, 40 full-time ambulances, 47-ish, 1,000 calls a month, that's a lot of workload off of those trucks. Yeah. So with as busy as we are without those 1,000 calls, it makes a really big difference for us in the field.
And that's a new program. I don't mean to wave my spoon at you. That's a new program. So we are actually going to see that number go up because we're adding people to C4, and it's going to become a 24-hour program. Right now it's not. And so we're only going to see that go up. Pretty cool.
Okay. And what would you say, out of the wide variety of medical emergencies there are, what would you say are the most common type that you respond to on a daily basis?
I would say a lot of the most common ones we go to are falls. So people who have fallen and either injured themselves or fallen and are unable to get up. We go on those a lot. We go on injury calls. So people who have injured themselves in some way. I used to say traffic accidents, but we actually don't go on those quite as much anymore because they've changed our response matrix to that a little bit. Kenny, do you know what our biggest call types are? Those are the ones that I tend to think of first. Chest pain's usually up there.
Yeah.
Yeah, we used to keep a data set that had our top 10 impressions. And one of the things that was super common, I think maybe Cassie, you said this, was traffic injuries.
Mm-hmm.
And did you talk about why that's not really at the top anymore?
I just said that our response matrix is a little different.
That's a big one. The one thing that we know is that when people think about EMS and they think about becoming a paramedic, what kinds of calls would you picture us running, Riley, if you were going to
Traffic
become a
accidents
paramedic?
mainly. Yeah.
What's that? Traffic accidents?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And what else? Give me like three kinds of calls.
Like Cassie said, like falls, injuries, somebody at the park broke their ankle, sprains,
Yeah.
fractures, stuff like that.
Yeah. And those are actually pretty common. A lot of people wind up going to paramedic school and they learn all these really amazing advanced things,
Mm-hmm.
which are important on very critical patients.
Mm-hmm.
And then it turns out that only a very low percentage of the patients we see need those critical skills.
Yeah.
And there can be a little bit of disappointment in that.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't get the adrenaline and life saving every day. But you can get life changing every day because it turns out the majority of our job is actually about treating people well.
Mm-hmm.
And that is 100% of our calls, right, Cassie?
Mm-hmm.
In terms of criticality of calls, though, I think that it's at like 6% of our calls, if I remember correctly, are the highest priority calls. So a large percentage of our calls are those calls that are still important to that person in that moment, but aren't necessarily going to require really advanced skills to change the outcome.
Yeah, I think that's one thing where EMS as a service, we're the youngest of the public safety service. You know, police and fire have both been around for a very, very long time. EMS really only started kind of in the 70s and has really kind of since then continued to advance. But it's difficult. A lot of times people will see us and they're like, oh, the fire department's here. And they don't realize that we're actually separate from the fire department. But also, you know, fire department has kind of the same goal anywhere in the country. But EMS, it could be part of that fire department. It could be a private, it could be something that, is like us. It could be volunteer. And so I kind of like to say that EMS has an identity crisis. Like, it's hard to have a really unified voice when there's people coming at it from so many different angles versus police and fire. I think it's pretty easy for them to have a unified voice because their jobs are to, do this or to do that. And like, you look at all of the things that our department does, there's patient care in all of that, but it's from slightly different angles. And so, I think that makes it hard because people don't necessarily know what they're getting into. And when you look at TV and you look at movies or TV shows that feature EMS, like Chicago Fire, which again has fire in the name, but, things like that, you always see these huge, crazy calls and, you think that's what you're getting into. And so, like Kenny said, it can be really kind of difficult when you get here and you discover that it's really about knowing what your patient needs, how to try to connect them to that. And in some ways, I say we're almost more like social workers than, other things in a lot of ways, because it's, being able to sit there and listen, because somebody might say that they're having X is their complaint, but once you kind of dig in, it might be that they don't have great access to housing, and so they have a really hard time getting their food and medications, and so they're having issues with their blood pressure, but that's because they don't have these other things. And so, a lot of it is kind of really digging in to try to figure out what that kind of root cause thing is and try to get them in contact with the very best resource. And so, somebody asked me recently, I think in the last 6 months, maybe, I would say I've had 4 or 5 calls, maybe. Let's say the last year, I've had 4 or 5 calls where I can say I made a difference and I saved somebody's life. That's not very many in that time, but I still find a lot of value and joy in what I do because I love meeting people and hearing their stories. But, a lot of times people expect it to be all the, exciting stuff. And that's not really what it is. We're the safety net. When people don't know who to call, they call us, and we try to help solve the problem.
And so you mentioned the EMT certification and the paramedic certification. Is there anything higher than the paramedic certification, or would those be really the only two medical certifications?
Yeah. So there are a few different ways to answer that, but in Texas, really, I like to just think of it as 4 levels of certification. There's EMT is actually the second level,
Mm-hmm.
and so there's actually a level below that, which used to be called ECA, and now I believe it's called EMR,
I
Emergency
think
Medical
so.
Responder. Um, and that can be done with about a week of 40 or 50 hours of training. So it's like a very good advanced first aid class, and then you can get certified by the state. In Texas, you have to be 18 to get certified, by the way, even for that
Mm-hmm.
EMR level. Not all states are like that. There's a lot of states that will allow teenagers to get that certification.
Yeah, Nevada, I could do it at 16.
There you go. And I think even National Registry allows any age. I don't think they have an age limit, but in Texas, it's 18. It came up recently.
Mm-hmm.
EMT is the next level above that. And so I like to think of that as about, let's say, 1 semester of college, but 6 hours in that semester. All right. So that's about how much training you need to be an EMT. So it's classroom plus some clinical internships that you heard Cassie mention. There's a level right above that called Advanced EMT, AEMT. It used to be called EMT Intermediate because it's actually not super common, and it's usually just something that people do on their way to
Mm-hmm.
the 4th level, which is paramedic. Um, and that paramedic you heard me say earlier is about 10 times the training requirement. So it's more like 2 years of full-time college is the most common way that people get that training. Sometimes they'll do it with a year of training, but that year of training is still done in an intensity and frequency that is pretty high. And I think most people prefer the 2 years of full-time college model from my standpoint. And there's a push to move us into an undergraduate degree requirement. So more similar to what nurses do in terms of the educational requirements. But we're not there yet, and because we've got to get everybody to agree. And when you're as varied as we are in EMS, like we talked in the beginning, getting everybody to agree is pretty tough. Then, if you do have your degree, though, and you're a paramedic in Texas, you get a special little patch. Can I see? Look at this gold rim. Look at that. Bling. So you get called a licensed paramedic. Um, and then in Austin, Travis County EMS, we have a small group of folks. It was 4. One has taken a leave of absence actually to work on a PhD, I think. But we have 3 paramedics that worked for us as paramedics on the ambulance and then left. They went to PA school and then they came back, and now they are paramedics that are also PAs.
Mm-hmm.
And so we call them paramedic practitioners, which is this extra special level up from that. And so they're physician's assistants that are experienced and certified paramedics, and they'll respond to 911 calls and do amazing things. And then we have our medical directors, our MDs. They're all fully licensed physicians. And it didn't used to be this way when Cassie and I started,
Mm-hmm.
but now being an EMS medical director is a board specialization.
Mm-hmm.
It was not a board specialization before. And so the doctors that are our medical directors, which right now we have 4, 5.
4 or 5, I believe. And we have the resident as well.
Yeah. So we are
Or
very
fellow, I
lucky.
mean.
fellow. And we're very lucky because we have these full-time doctors and some associate doctors that they specifically focus on EMS, and we are their focus. They're not, we're not a side job, if you will. In Texas, one of the great things about EMS here, and this is not true everywhere, is that paramedics can do essentially whatever a physician has decided they are trained and competent and credentialed to do. And that's why we do all these things that, like Cassie says, she asks people around the country when she talks to them, tells them the kind of things we do. We have some paramedics that are credentialed to do field amputations, and to do very, very surprisingly advanced procedures. But that's because in Texas, a physician is allowed to do that, and a paramedic can do it if we're working under the doctor's license in that way. And here, because we have our own full-time physicians, they get more time with us, they become familiar, they trust us, and that's why we get into that sort of spot. So does that make sense? So there's really, within EMS, technically just those 4 levels, but then we actually have some little incremental levels up. Did I miss anything, Cassie?
No, the only thing I was going to add a little bit was, so here in Texas, what Kenny was talking about, it's called delegated practice, and it's very different from other places in the country. There are some places in the country that it's actually the state that sets the protocols for the entire state. And so it's like the list of medications they can give, procedures. And so like here in Texas, one thing, we actually carry blood, and we can give blood to patients who need it. And there's still one state, New York, where by state law, EMS, it specifically says they can't. And so that's kind of some ideas of differences of what you can do one place versus another. And one of the other really cool things about us having our own physicians that we call and talk to, even just last night, I made a phone call to a doc, and it was like, "Hey, Dr. Miller, it's Cassie." She's like, "Cassie, how you doing?" She knows exactly who I am. We've had lots of interactions. She knows me and my capabilities. And so I was able to walk her through what I wanted to do, and we were able to come up with a successful plan and kind of go from there. Versus I worked in Portland for a very small amount of time, only like 3 months. But there it was a private service called AMR. And when you called, you would talk to any doctor. They have no idea who you are. And usually if you were trying to get orders to do something specific, it was just bring them to the hospital. And here we can ask for all sorts of things. And if we can back up why we want to do it and it's sound medical judgment, our docs will usually be like, "Yeah, go for it. Let's do that." Or have you thought of this? Let's try this instead. Or had you realized XYZ? Let's, that's why your plan maybe wasn't as great. So let's try this instead. And, call me back after the call and let's talk about it. And so it's really amazing that we have that ability. And there have been times where I've had a call that afterwards I was like, I don't know if I did that as well as I could. And I can call them and just be like, "Hey, can we talk about this call?" and make sure that my thinking was in the right spot. And they're like, "Yeah, totally." So it's pretty neat.
And I do want to add that our physicians run the 911 calls with us often, like all the time. And that's another thing that a lot of EMS systems don't see. And again, that sets us apart from maybe an EMS system that's being run by a fire department, right? You're not going to see that very often. I'm not saying that there aren't places where that happens. There certainly are. And there are some really good EMS systems run by fire departments and really good physicians out there. But for us, that's our whole identity. And so the doctors that work here full time, they'll respond to 911 calls and they'll show up and help us with patient care out in the field. And that's pretty great. That's pretty amazing.
Okay. And do either of you have any tips for anybody that is wanting to go into the medical field or particularly emergency medicine?
I would say come on some ride outs. Not every organization has a program where people can come and do some observational rides, but we do. And it's something that I think, again, not a lot of people necessarily know what EMS is. And so it's really great to be able to come in and kind of get a chance to see it. You also can really get that very wide exposure to calls, everything from maybe something critical to I've literally had someone call me for insomnia, so they couldn't sleep, and because they stubbed their toe. So, you can get this huge range of all these things. And also, you get this ability to get to walk into somebody's home. And so you get to see what their inside life is like. And so sometimes people might be like, oh, I really love the medicine. But like the smells that go along with maybe going into some people's homes that don't have the same standard of cleanliness as me, I can't do that. And so, it could be something that like you might be able to get used to that. But what I would say is really talk to some people who do the job and talk to some people who have done it for different lengths of time. Because I think it's really something that there are times where it kind of, sometimes it's easier than others. And talk to people about what's made it fun for them if they've done it for a long time and why they've kind of stayed in it and kind of, maybe learn some of their little tips and tricks for how they've stayed in the field. Because sometimes people have burnout, which you might have heard people talk about. It's kind of some of those frustrations of kind of those calls that are the boring or unexciting ones where maybe people they don't know who to call, so they call us. People can get kind of sometimes frustrated with that, I think, if they don't have the right mindset. And so learning how to kind of deal with some of those things is good. And so that's why I would say talk to a lot of different people, because if you talk to just one person who's maybe really salty and unhappy, they might really turn you off from it, versus you talk to somebody like me. I've been doing this for 19 years, and hopefully I make it sound like something that I enjoy, and I would suggest somebody else come and try. But, so talk to a few different people and try to do some job shadowing and see, if it's what you think it is and that it's something that you would enjoy.
That's pretty solid advice. I like that. And I'll add to it that if you can find somebody that you trust and respect that is willing to, um, guide and mentor you a little bit in that decision, then I think that's worth its weight in gold. We actually have a program here called the EMS Explorer program. It's run through the Boy Scouts of America.
Yes, I saw
You
that.
familiar with Explorer programs?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes.
So we have one that's called EMS Post 247, and it's a pretty big post. I was just at a meeting earlier this week, and gosh, I feel like there were at least 40 folks there. So the Explorer Post is for teenagers right on through the age of, I think, 21.
Mm-hmm.
So we have some like early college age folks in there that are really learning about our profession, and that's pretty cool. I mean, they get to do ride outs. They actually get a uniform, their own
Mm-hmm.
version of a uniform.
Mm-hmm.
Now they're getting ID tags. They get to work with the radios and learn the operations and do the cool stuff. And that we've had several explorers
Mm-hmm.
that have moved from the Explorer post into a career with us. And I'm thinking of Melody Malone,
Yep. She
who
just promoted to captain.
exactly where I was going with that. So she
Mm-hmm.
came out of the Explorer post, and again, you have to be 18 to get your EMT. So she got her EMT. She got hired with us.
Mm-hmm.
It is the exception to the experience rule, is that you can come to us as an EMT from the Explorer post. Um, and right, Cassie,
As long as you
is that
have 2 years of good standing with the Explorer
at the
Post, you
Explorer
can
post?
you can come in as a brand new EMT.
Yeah, you can't just hack it. It's not a hack. You don't just get
Mm-hmm.
to like join for a week and then you're on. So yeah, she came in, um, has been around our department since she was a teenager.
Mm-hmm.
Got her EMT, got hired as a medic, then went through our internal paramedic school and was eligible and then competitive, promoted to clinical specialist.
Mm-hmm.
She went through that 16-week PL5 program, that ALS program we talked about, was successful in that, was credentialed. And then she, after serving enough time, took the competitive test for captain and promoted to captain. So she's gone all the way from a 16-year-old non-certified explorer to
Mm-hmm.
a full-fledged captain in our department, and that's really cool. She's not the
Mm-hmm.
only one that has come up through the program and done great things.
Her brother also has. I just enjoy it because it's a little family link. He also was an explorer, and he just promoted to
Mhm.
clinical specialist, that ALS advanced care provider. So we've definitely
And
gotten some good folks from it.
yeah, so if people have opportunities to do that when they're if you're younger in your community, you should do that. I think the thing that people maybe miss sometimes in their understanding of what we do, I tried to kind of hint at it earlier, but we're here to care for people. And so focusing on the skills that help you with that is, I think, the most important thing. And so those would be things like learn about active listening, learn about building rapport with people, um, learn about compassion, learn about being trauma informed, and you'll understand a lot more about what our job really is when you know those things. The physical skills and the medical knowledge can come pretty easily, but if you have that foundation of caring about people and being able to connect to people and maintain that care and connection, then you're going to be a fantastic paramedic, no matter where you go, here or anywhere else. And I really want that for anybody, because I want every community to get the kind of care that we get. That's the most critical thing that somebody should really focus on. And I think everybody has a capacity for that. So I'm not going to say, hey, if you don't want to care for people, or if you don't want to be an active listener, then maybe you shouldn't be an EMS. I don't think that's the case. Everybody has the capacity to care for people. So that's my tip.
Okay. I think we have 4 more questions.
Wow.
We're almost done.
I love it.
One of these is one that I've seen debated in multiple EMS agencies, as well as several people have commented on previous videos of mine, and some of our school's Explorer program, quite small, but several people in the Explorer program were talking about black tourniquets versus orange tourniquets. And so the question is, as a civilian paramedic, do you think that in the event of a trauma emergency that somebody else puts on a tourniquet prior to your arrival, do you think that a black tourniquet would give the higher possibility of it being cut during the examination, or do you think an orange tourniquet would be better because of that high-vis capability?
Interesting question.
have never considered that question, and I love it. I think it's a really cool question, because I should have added one of the things that I think is so critical as a paramedic is creative problem solving. That's what makes this job fun. Like, we're not robots. And it's not to disparage anybody else in the healthcare system, but we're pretty unique, and one of the only roles you can have in healthcare where we get to make our own decisions about what we're going to do and how we're going to help somebody. And a question like that really demonstrates a lot of creativity and thinking about problems. I really like that. I have never worked around an orange tourniquet, so I can't say for sure which one's going to be better, but I will challenge maybe the assumption, which is that everything you're saying would be true in the setting of somebody wearing a uniform like this, right? Because this is going to match the color of the tourniquet,
Yeah.
but not all clothing, as we know, looks like this. And so it may not be as critical for somebody that isn't wearing very dark clothing. I, at the same time, can't think of too many people that are wearing bright orange clothes, and so maybe that is just a universally better color. Those are my thoughts. I don't know. What do you think, Cassie? Also have a longhorn. Yay, orange.
Yeah.
I think my brain goes to, a lot of modern day tourniquet use came from military. And so a lot of things in military, they tend to think, again, high visibility there is kind of a negative. And so, I think that a lot of it tended to be that. And also, it's kind of interesting. I'll see sometimes people who buy their own gloves and they're black. For me personally, I would prefer to have light colored gloves because I can see blood on them when I'm doing like my, finger rakes down looking for bleeding. And so, I think sometimes that might just be more of a carryover from kind of the military and again, law enforcement, because here, all of our cops or almost all of them want to have tourniquets and carry them.
Right.
And again, they don't want to have something that's kind of bright and stands out. We, again, kind of know and expect. And there's also, there's Stop the Bleed classes. I don't know if you've heard anything about that. Those are out there and pretty prevalent in places that you can go, and actually where they have AEDs, they also will have tourniquets now sometimes. I don't know what colors they tend to be in those. I think for me, and everybody does things differently. I'm a fairly detail-oriented person. And so for me, if I get there and somebody says I've applied a tourniquet, or if there's anything to even make me think that that might have been the case, I'm going to be looking at them. And most tourniquets are also thick enough that you'd have to work kind of hard to get through it. So I think if I were to encounter something like that, my tendency is I would look. If I hadn't noticed it for some reason, I would look and see and been like, oh, somebody put this on. And so for us in our training, we also don't teach to take tourniquets off so much. What we'll do is if it's maybe not effective, we'll apply another one above it if we can. And sometimes we can even apply, another one on top of that if we need to. And so not literally on top of the tourniquet, but in addition to. And so, for me, I don't think, and say I kind of had to talk out loud and work through that, but for me, I don't think the color makes a difference. I would be paying attention to what I'm doing when I'm stripping somebody to see and expose where the injuries are. And if something like that happened, I would be like, wait, I need to adjust and see what's happening.
Like that. I don't get paid by the company that makes these, but as a department, we are pretty loyal to specifically the cat tourniquets and authentic cat tourniquets, and the version now that has the ridges so that you're not dealing with the blood slippage. But these things are lifesavers for sure. So no matter what color you get, just make sure you're getting a good, authentic, well-made tourniquet, because there are plenty of horror stories. We actually, one of our captains, Andrew Hewitt, has built a national reputation training folks in, casualty medicine. And he works a lot with law enforcement agencies and does a whole lot of stuff that is like Stop the Bleed, but even beyond. He's had a big hand in developing our active attack response.
We didn't even talk about that group and the weekend stuff. Yeah.
Active shooter stuff. Oh, yeah. We didn't talk about our CAST medic group.
Yes, CAST med.
Yeah. So we have that counter assault strike team, CAST. We have medics that really embed with police officers in downtown Austin, and for the purpose of doing life-saving trauma response. And they're there instead of in an ambulance. It's a team of law enforcement to provide appropriate cover, and the medics to provide advanced care. They're wearing enhanced body armor, and it's different than the tactical medic program, which works with the SWAT team, which can actually be pretty slow moving. This is meant to put folks in the area where we see gunshot wounds and stabbings, so that they can get to those people quicker and get them right to our highest level trauma center, which is very close by. And they've had such an effect on outcomes that the trauma surgeons were trying to figure out what was happening. Like, why are so many people making it from the ER door to our operating tables? There was enough of a significant increase statistically that they knew something was going on. And when they were trying to study it, and then they realized it was our CAST Med program, and Andrew Hewitt had a lot to do with that. I mean, if not everything to do with it, but it is a team. Anyway, Hewitt is quick to tell you that the counterfeit tourniquets have been a big problem and have cost lives. Yeah. Didn't expect to go on all CAST Med. Yeah, what do you think?
I carry an orange tourniquet, but I did recently purchase a larger kit with then some more medical supplies, so I'm upgrading my current first aid kit, and it comes with, I currently have, I think, a a Gen 5 cat tourniquet.
Yeah, me
And
too.
then I'm upgrading it to the newest one, which I think they recently came out with the Gen 8 tourniquet.
Ooh.
But it comes with a black one, so I'll have
Uh,
a black one and an orange one, but probably going to put the black one as my first one on the outside because it's newer, and then the orange one on the inside. And then also,
do,
as Cassie mentioned, I definitely think the light gloves is very helpful in a trauma scenario.
yeah. What's the difference between the 5th gen and the 8th gen on those tourniquets? Do you know?
Um, the the fifth generation is a little smaller, as
Uh,
well as the way it straps in. The fifth gen, the the plastic piece that keeps the windlass from moving,
uh,
it's it's just two pieces that curve out from the actual strap,
right.
whereas the Gen 8 has a flat plastic piece that's attached to the tourniquet, and then yeah. So
Okay.
whereas the Gen 5 is just the two wings that come out.
Ah, so this is not a Gen 5. All this time I thought. That's probably Hewitt keeping us with the latest, greatest gear right there. Do you
Yeah.
do you practice using a tourniquet?
I've practiced a few times, not as regularly as I think I should.
Yeah.
I mainly practice self-application because I don't really have, like as I said, our Explore program is through an online school, so we don't regularly have a person available to practice tourniquet application. But occasionally, I will volunteer my mom to be my patient. Um, and then certain times we do have opportunities, and then sometimes when I go with my dad up there towards Austin area, I have some friends who their family are in the medical field, are EMTs, and as well as my uncle is um, a police officer, so we often uh, not exactly train but practice with
Yeah.
different what we call, or what the military calls, TCC tactics, tactical combat casualty care.
Yep.
Well, it's actually three C's. But uh, sorry.
Yeah. That's
Also, another
that's
thing
great.
is what what do y'all think about CPR masks? I know
Ooh.
they have the pocket CPR masks versus the one that I'm currently having shipped to me, which is the one that you have to have the e-lock for, the bigger mask that goes on, like it's called a pocket mask. It's similar to the ones they use for a BVM, but you breathe into it instead of having to attach a BVM to it.
And it's got that little valve in there.
Mm-hmm.
So and there's some research out there that kind of shows this. We teach something called hands-only CPR. So in cardiac arrest, it is actually not as important to worry about doing any sort of ventilation for the initial stuff. The most important thing is quick getting CPR on the chest and getting a defibrillator as quickly as possible. And so there's been lots of research into this, like I said, kind of all over the country, and a lot of the cities. Seattle has one of the best cardiac survival rates, and what they teach is also hands-only CPR. And so for me, in terms of like the stuff that I kind of have, if I were to roll up on something in my car, I've got tourniquet, I've got some basic bandaging stuff. And that's really it, because I figure most of the time, somebody's going to be here pretty quick, but I can do compressions. I know how to do those. I don't really, and gloves. I don't really, need any kind of protection for that, or a tourniquet is something that I can do that can be life-saving. So I know I'll be curious to see what Kenny has to say on that one. But for me, I'm not doing any sort of ventilations on anybody.
Yeah. I wish I was home because I would bust out the kit that I was just on an 8-day backcountry hike. We
Mm-hmm.
had no electricity, no running water, no cell
Yeah.
coverage. So imagine that you're an experienced paramedic, and you can build any kit you want, knowing that you're going to be in the backcountry for 8 days, and that we're 24 to 48 hours away from any rescue. We're up in Canada and this island. So, what kinds of things do you carry in that situation? For me, one thing is you have to be really careful about weight. So I can't just carry everything. I had to make
Yeah.
some decisions, and I didn't carry any kind of mask at all. So I pretty much live in the camp of Cassi there. I One reason in that particular case is a bit different than probably what you're asking about. But if I need to do CPR on somebody and I'm 48 hours away from an AED or definitive ALS care, that's way more likely to be an effort in futility, and I'm going to do everything I can to save that life, but I don't think the mask is going to make the difference there.
Yeah.
In an urban environment where you're doing quick first response and you just want to get things going, it's the same story. Actually, our department innovated an approach to CPR, and we don't teach the American Heart Association, what are commonly called the CARD classes, or the alphabet classes. So we teach our own version of CPR. The Austin Fire Department learns it as well, and we all work together. And you've probably heard of it or something similar by now, but when we started it, it was very innovative. And that's pit crew CPR, where everybody's got a specific job, just like you would on a pit crew for like the Indianapolis 500, or you
Yeah.
should probably use a CODA reference there. But the whole idea is just that everybody knows what they're going to do, which keeps you from dealing with what's called cognitive overload and having to remember all the different things, and you get focused on one task and forget about another, or you skip. And the reason is the number one reason for making sure that we can keep some people focused on one job while other people are doing the other jobs is to maintain that sustained movement of blood, which is what Cassi was talking about. And so it just all comes down to maintaining effective compressions and minimizing time off chest. And that's the basis for how we do CPR. And we actually have a very high save rate, especially relative to national statistics. So, yeah. What do you
And
think? So you have a pocket mask. You got the pocket mask thing.
Yeah.
So you're planning
I
on
haven't
using that?
actually got a chance to use it. I just ordered it, so but I've seen several videos on it, and the way I set up my kits are um I'm a big fan of tactical medicine, so I set it up in the way that the PJs, which are the
Yeah.
Air Force's special operations version of a tactical medic, and the way they have it is they have Cat Alpha, which is like your highest trauma or cardiac arrest emergency. I have that. Then you have your I skipped a few, so I'm trying to remember which one it is. Cat Charlie, which is in the middle, so like you're not life threatening, but still you kind of want to get that, have quick access to that. And then you have your Cat Echo, which is your minor, like a band-aid or a blister, stuff like that, your minor stuff. So usually this newer kit, the way I'm going to design it is it's going to have an IFAK on that, because it's a flat pack, so it's a tactical style one that's just like a rectangle that's sort of thin. So it's gonna have an IFAK on the front for trauma emergencies, as well as I did a video on X-Shear. They sent me for free very high quality titanium pair of trauma shears. So I have that on the
Nice.
outside, and then on the
Wow.
inside it would be other bleed stuff, then a section for airway, then a section for like sprain, fracture, burns, and then your minor stuff like your band-aids and other stuff like that. So I usually have that with the airway section, but I think I would only use it in the event that I have a second person that can do that while I'm doing, or while somebody else is doing compressions,
Yeah.
instead of trying to compress, rescue
Mm-hmm.
breath, compress, rescue breath.
Yep.
Just focusing on one task if it's just me, and then doing that as well. And that's one thing that I try to orient my kits, one, around what I do, and two, allowing, if I'm injured, somebody else who has medical experience being able to open that kit and see, okay, this is airway, grab this is bleeding, grab this.
Mm-hmm.
um so I mainly do like hiking, I go off-roading, so having that to where somebody else can just open it and get what they need is very
Mm-hmm.
useful, because if I get injured, I have that on my four-wheeler, so they can just grab that, open it up, and be like, okay, he needs a bandage here, put that
Mm-hmm.
on, and go from there. But another question is, I don't know that y'all use these, but do you believe that it's do you believe that people should put in their first aid kits NPAs, nasal geopharyngeal airways? Do you think those are useful? Do you think they're not? What are your thoughts on those?
I would say overall, I'm a bigger fan of NPAs versus OPAs because to me, it's a lower risk. If you're doing an OPA, there's that chance that they might still have a gag reflex, so you could potentially stimulate that. Also, a side note, if it was somebody who maybe had an opiate overdose, ideally that person's going to wake up. So if you have given them some Narcan, but you've got an OPA in, again, you're going to have a higher risk of aspiration. So I prefer those NPAs. And also, I just kind of feel like that's something that if I kind of had to choose between the two, I feel like that's a little bit lower risk. So that's where I would kind of fall on that if I had to choose between which to have in my kit.
I totally agree. I've had a lot of success with MPAs.
Mm-hmm.
Also, there seems to be, in my experience, like much more variability in mandibular size than there is in the appropriate size for an NPA. And I almost never have to adjust my MPA size.
Mm-hmm.
But sometimes like OPAs are not as universal.
Yeah.
Some big old jaws out there, and and but also, especially some of the activities that you're talking about, Riley, like mountain biking, hiking, that sort of
Mm-hmm.
stuff. If you find somebody that has been severely injured from trauma such that they need ventilatory support, it might be from a TBI.
Mm-hmm.
And so what else might be going on? What do, what do you think that might like impair your use of an OPA? Do you know? Have you learned this?
Different. It's hard to say. Like, there could
There's
be
a lot.
what I would first think of that would block an OPA is, one, the gag reflex, as well as if they were, let's say, my main activity that I carry the kid on is um, while I'm on my four wheeler, which I've crashed it multiple times, and the main thing that I do when I crash is I clench my jaw.
Yep.
So
Mm-hmm.
when they're in trauma and they're most people will clench their jaw, you don't want to be trying to pry that open to put
Mm-hmm.
the OPA in. It's easier just to put an NPA in, and then, as Cassi mentioned, if it is an overdose and they're unconscious, once they wake back up, it's easier just to pull the NPA out instead of
Mm-hmm.
having to take out the
Yeah.
OPA.
Yeah, or even leave it in. I've
Mm-hmm.
had some folks
Yeah.
that where they're still altered, they won't necessarily fight the MPA right away.
Mm-hmm.
You're exactly right, man. Man, you're gonna be such a good paramedic.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that jaw clenching, that trismus, that can be a response from like a traumatic brain injury, for
Mm-hmm.
instance, makes it just impossible to use an OPA. So if you only have to have one, you're almost always gonna have access to the nose.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And as you mentioned, a brain injury, another thing I often carry is a pen light to check
Mm-hmm.
pupil dilation, because that is if I were to crash my four wheeler or on a mountain bike or even just a fall while hiking, head injury and brain injury are common, so it's helpful to be able to check that pupil dilation
Mm-hmm.
for a head injury if that is an injury that occurs. Um,
Yeah, you're
So
well prepared. I
you
love
are.
having kit discussions.
I
yeah.
have a question for you. Did you know that you can actually get a wilderness EMT?
Hmm.
I did not know that.
Yeah, so there are a few different organizations out there. I will fully own my bias because I went to one that was a certain school of thought. It's one of the older ones. And so there's lots of different ones out there, but that was actually where I got my EMT. And the way that they taught it, it was a month long class. It was like boot camp, but we were up in the woods in Colorado. We were out in the woods doing night scenarios, and like we had to learn how to make um, like a traction splint using, a
Mm-hmm.
crazy creek chair and like a cup
Yeah.
and some sticks and things. But so there's actually, you can do them here in the States, but they actually even have some programs where you can do it in like Chile or Patagonia, really cool places. And so it sounds like you really enjoy a lot of that kind of austere area
Yeah.
stuff. So they also have something called a wilderness first responder, which
Hmm.
you can do that's kind of a little bit lower level. It's similar to that ECA or EMR that Kenny was talking about. It's
Hmm.
commonly called a woofer, but those might be some things for you to look into. And so I know other places do it,
Yeah.
but Knowles is a really cool school, the National Outdoor Leadership School, and they've got the Wilderness Medicine Institute kind of section of it. And they teach their classes all over. They actually have done one here at UT over like spring break. They did a woofer here one year because I was on their mailing list. So that might be something kind of fun to look into for you.
Yeah.
I
I looked
I
into.
I'm sorry. Go ahead, buddy.
I was saying, I looked into certain certifications, and you can take a CPR class at my age, but that's one of the reasons why I started this YouTube channel, to give kids my age who necessarily can't get an EMT
Mm-hmm.
certification or even a first responder certification the ability to still be able to assist in a medical emergency prior to emergency
Mm-hmm.
responders getting there. Like, let's say you and your friends are hiking and you're a middle schooler, and usually you're not hiking close to where there's emergency services
Mm-hmm.
available. So it's important to be able to assist in that prior to emergency services, because I was looking at CPR certifications and then BLS and your EMT basic
Mm-hmm.
certifications. All of those you have to be, I think one CPR is 16 and then the rest is 18.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
that's awesome. I hope you do all of that.
Mm-hmm.
And I was just gonna give an extra vote for what Cassie was talking about, which is Knowles, that National Outdoor Leadership School. You'll probably not find anybody that's critical of that program. It's a pretty amazing program.
And they
And when you
also
become,
just have cool classes where you can do hikes with them in different places and just get some really neat outdoor leadership experience, which
yeah,
also
Knowles,
sounds right up your alley.
yeah,
Yeah.
Knowles is about way more than becoming an EMT. It
Mm-hmm.
really is a pretty incredible program. When you become a paramedic, which you clearly are, going to be a fantastic paramedic. Hopefully, we still work here when you get here. You can actually become board certified as a wilderness paramedic,
Mm-hmm.
WPC. And that is something we didn't talk about when we are talking about anything beyond paramedic. There are board certification specialties like critical care
Mm-hmm.
paramedic and flight paramedic that we actually use those as prerequisites for a higher level of training and credentialing in our department. But the wilderness paramedic C is somebody that Cassie, Piper, right? I know.
Which one?
Don't you know the gentleman from the University of Kentucky that created the wilderness paramedic
Oh,
program?
yes.
David Piper.
Mm-hmm.
He's
He's
pretty
got
great.
some really neat, he has a really neat keynote
God,
speech that I think you can find talking about the importance of education, formal education in
in
EMS.
this, yeah.
And it's
He's
so
Yeah.
good. It's kind of talking about where he hopes the profession is going to be going in the future. It was such a good keynote.
he's a great dude, and so he pretty much created that curriculum and got everything through in the specialty. It's this group that does our board specialties. Is that backwards for you? It's backwards for you.
No, it's correct for me anyways.
For y'all, it's the right way.
Mm-hmm.
So the IBSC is the board through which we get those board certifications. Those are optional. I don't know any place that mandates IBSC board certification, but it's hold yourself to a higher standard and do that. So you can become a WPC in the future.
Yeah.
Thanks, David Pfeiffer. Shout out. I think he has a podcast. I don't know if he still has it, but he used to have a podcast that was all about like wilderness medicine and stuff. It was called Raw. RAW.
Last question. I know we've gone on to 2 hours now. Last question. What would you say was the sort of scariest or hardest call that you've been on in your career in the medical field?
This one's always kind of a challenging question for me to answer. I think for me, it can be sometimes a little bit difficult to reflect back on some of those because it's kind of opening back up what might have been a really traumatic experience or very graphic injuries or things like that. So I kind of like to think of it a little bit more as one of the coolest calls I've ever been on. I kind of like to flip that script a little bit. And so what I would say, one of my coolest calls was actually just within the last few months. And it was a woman who had given birth at home. It was her second child. And it was about 4 hours after she had given birth. And they called us because her blood pressure was very low. And when we got there, she was very pale. Normally, when your blood pressure goes pretty low, one of the compensatory mechanisms is your heart rate tends to speed up. And her heart rate wasn't really very fast, which for me was very concerning. We were also able to kind of look at a measurement of what's called her end tidal. So when you breathe out that carbon dioxide, and that can help give a good picture of kind of your overall circulatory status. And so I was very quickly, even before we got on scene, I called for the closest resource that had blood because I knew that was what she needed. And we got there, and before we got her out of the house, as soon as she was in the ambulance, the commander started hooking up the blood, and she was very confused and kind of had a hard time talking to us when we first got there. She was very, very, very sick. And within just a few minutes, while we were on the way to the hospital, we didn't even ultimately decide we had to go with lights and sirens because it was the middle of the night, so there was no traffic. And because she was improving so much with that blood that we were giving her, by the time we got to the hospital, she was awake. She was talking to me. She wasn't confused. Her vital signs had improved pretty significantly, but like that's a call that I can look at and say, I saved a life. And it was the first time I got to give blood. And so there's like not a whole lot of things that I can say after almost 20 years of doing this that like it was a first. And so that was one where it was like I got to see somebody turn around so quickly. And it was because we had the right resources that I could give her. And so it was really neat. And I also think that I might have made a difference for her kind of long term. She had some stress around medical stuff. And so I was able to kind of put on something else that I'm really passionate about, which is mental health stuff, and kind of talk to her about something called EMDR that I thought might be really helpful because she had had some very traumatic experiences in the past around medical procedures and medical care that made her really scared of anything. And so I was kind of able to explain to her a little bit about what that was and suggest that maybe it's something she looks into. And so not only did I maybe make a difference in like that day and for her and her family, her newborn and her other kiddo, but also maybe long-term in the rest of her life that maybe medical care might not be quite as scary. So I don't know that part, but that's what I would like to hope, you know. So that's what I would say is my coolest call recently.
I love that, Cassie. I know we talked about the blood just a little bit, but Riley, it's crazy. And I hope that you get to see in your career this sort of like innovation and change, and I'm sure that you will. But, for years and years and years, when we both started, Cassie, did you start in the 90s?
No, I wasn't until early 2000s.
And make me feel even older.
I mean, we can count when I hung out with my dad at the station, maybe.
That's pretty cool. I bet it was still true when you started, but we used the standard for a trauma patient was 2 large
Yep.
bore, so the wider catheters that we're
Mm-hmm.
putting in, 2 large bore IVs, and they were normal saline almost every time,
Mm-hmm.
and run them wide open.
Mm-hmm.
And so what we're trying to do, what we thought we were doing, is keeping somebody's blood pressure up so that all of their vital organs didn't shut down from that lack of blood pressure, including their kidneys, their heart, their brain. And but what we're really doing is just putting water in their blood system. And so it's not as much about the pressure, of course, as it is about carrying oxygen and all the other things to those organs that need them. And so we figured that out, and we stopped. The other thing is that pushing all of that water into somebody that's bleeding interrupts the body's ability to stop the bleeding with all the clotting factors. So we're pushing clots away that could be stopping the bleeding and just replacing it. And one of the internet folks sort of coined the term pasta water. That we're just replacing blood with pasta water, and you wouldn't do that to somebody you love. So we stopped doing that in EMS a while back and moved to a position where we don't give a lot of fluid at all when we're supporting even a bleeding patient. But it wasn't until we got whole blood very recently that you realized, or I realized, I'm sure Cassie realized, like just how much we weren't doing all those years. Because in all the years of doing exactly what I was supposed to do, I never saw somebody's blood pressure, heart rate, skin color, mentation improve. And now it doesn't take much blood.
Like 1 unit. That was all we did, and
Yeah.
it was like a switch flipped. It was such an improvement.
Color change, brain perfusion changes. It's such a powerful and amazing tool, and it sucks to think about the reality that when we thought we were doing the right thing, we weren't having the same effect as we thought. But it's also reassuring to know that we work in a profession that will adjust fire, will see that this isn't working and change, and will be rooted in evidence-based medicine in moving to another solution, and will support the creativity and innovation that it took to get to a point where we're now using whole blood in an urban environment and really actually like saving lives like that. I love that story. That's great, Cassie.
What's yours, Kenny?
I don't have a great one. I don't. I'm terrible. I don't know that I could answer scariest call so well, and I'm terrible about remembering all sorts of things that might typically cause a big adrenaline response. But I've certainly enjoyed a career with a lot of cool experiences, and I often get the most satisfaction from those times where you build rapport with somebody, if you've heard that word, and that without getting too nerdy, you can actually. Do you know the sympathetic nervous system? Have you learned about that yet?
I don't think so.
It's okay. It's okay. I'm not here to test you. I just want to support how much you really do know, which is a lot. But that's your fight or flight system, and I know you've heard of that, right?
Yeah.
So when somebody has an adrenaline dump because their survival is threatened, you can see the effect. Their blood pressure is up, their heart rate's up, their respiratory rate's up, their pupils are dilated. That's one of the things you can see right away. And they're anxious, and they don't trust anything because they don't know what's a threat. When you can build rapport with somebody that's in that state, you can actually activate. There's another nervous system that mediates or counters the sympathetic nervous system, and you can see the change. You can see their pupils go from this to this. Because their pupils were this while they were trying to take in as much light as they could and find an escape route so that they could survive the bear attack. Or their pupils are like this because they're trying to see as much light as they can so that they can fight you and survive the fight. But now that they know their life isn't being threatened and they deactivate that fight or flight part of their nervous system, there's a real physical change. And the respiratory rate comes down, their heart rate comes down, and they trust you, and you know that you have that connection and that rapport, and now they can participate in their own care, and they can actually get what they need. And I love that. I love that kind of moment in being a paramedic when we can actually get somebody to a point where they trust a caregiver and then participate in their own care. And I know that doesn't have anything to do with being the scariest call in the world, but I guess it's that the other person was scared. How's that? It kind of qualifies a little bit.
Yeah.
I will give a shout out to Winter Storm Uri in 2021. It was pretty much the worst week of my entire career. And I'll leave it at that in terms of the details, but it was, as far as like the calls that I ran, but that week broke records for us as a system in terms of how many calls. I think before that, Cassie, I'm going to get these numbers wrong, but let's say our record for number of calls in one day was 600 calls, which is a lot. 600 calls in one day is a lot, right? One of the first days of Winter Storm Uri, I think we ran close to 2,000. Ran over 1,500 at least in one day. So we didn't just break our daily record, like we just destroyed our daily record.
Yeah.
And then we had 5 days of that where we didn't have transportation, we didn't have water, we didn't have power. Our hospital systems were severely impaired.
Yeah.
And we had to find ways to take care of people like we were in the middle of a third world country experiencing a disaster. So we, again, because we have the amazing medical directors we have, I remember one night meeting my medical director in the middle of the night in a motel parking lot. Like, that's not sketchy. And he takes a box out of his truck and puts it in my truck. And it was a thing called Kayexalate, which is a way to treat when somebody has very high potassium levels that can be deadly. If their kidneys aren't functioning, and that's how they would normally get rid of the potassium, the way that they would normally be treated is dialysis. But dialysis takes a lot of power and a lot of water, and we're a city with no dialysis. So these people that normally depend on a machine to do what their kidney does were dying, and we're going to die. But this uncommon now medication was what they needed, and it basically allowed them to push the potassium out of their bodies, not in the most comfortable way, but in the bathroom. It was really disaster medicine that we were doing all of a sudden in the middle of the 10th largest city in the country. And it was rough, terrible. Like I said, don't want to do that week ever again. But at the same time, for all sorts of reasons, but it was inspiring to see.
The innovations, one thing that they figured out to kind of continue to be able to bridge a little bit after the Kayexalate was they actually used a fire truck to bring water to a dialysis center so that it could run for a little while. So like that's kind of their just really cool out of the box thinking that, we got to watch and see in action.
Riley, I'm going to tell you, because you're into this wilderness medicine, saving lives, that sort of thing. But there are 5 ways that you can save a life without being a certified healthcare provider. And I know that you already know some of them, but an AED and being able to use an AED, right? That's one that's definitively life-saving. You can take somebody from cardiac arrest right out of it. That's awesome. Epinephrine. So being able to use an epi auto injector when it's prescribed to somebody would be the hiccup for you. Narcan. Being able to reverse an opioid, which has taken somebody's ability to breathe away, like that's life-saving. Stop the bleed, the use of tourniquets, and also wound packing, which it sounds like you've learned those things from the people.
I think 2 or 3 packs of S-rolled gauze. So
awesome,
cool.
So you're so ready. And then the 5th thing, do you want to guess the 5th thing? Don't have to be trained or certified. I one goes with the AED. That's there, but it's rare to really take somebody from life-threatening emergency out of it with just CPR, right? You need the other chains. But AED can be the last one. The last of my 5 is being able to treat hyperthermia. So true heat stroke, which just takes an ice bath. You don't have to be somebody special for that. But there are good ways to do it, but you can get innovative and creative as long as you can get somebody in an ice bath and stop their internal temperature from rising and doing permanent brain damage or killing them, you can literally save a life that way. So there's your 5.
Yeah.
Epi, go
I
ahead.
try to, in my kit, I have a section that I sometimes remove and switch out. So in the winter, I try to carry things for hypothermia where I have emergency blankets, different hand
Nice.
warmers and stuff to keep you warm. And then
Mhm.
during the summer, I try to keep hydration packets, ice packs, things to keep you cool and make sure you don't overheat.
Good. Brilliant. I love it.
Alright, everybody, that's going to conclude our episode for today. Thank you to all of the staff at Austin Travis County EMS. Thank you to our 2 interviewees for taking the time out of their day to come on and speak about their career and how they got into those positions. Remember that the best way to support the channel is make sure to subscribe, like the video, and go to the description of the channel, and there is our merch store as well as our affiliate link with Refuge Medical. Make sure you go check those out, and that's going to conclude our video. So stay safe and keep learning.